Okay, hello everybody. One of the most controversial issues that is unsolved is the controversy over making marijuana legal or leaving it illegal. In the United States, marijuana controversy dates back to the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937, which made anybody who wanted to buy, sell, distribute, or handle marijuana pay a federal tax and use a stamp. The federal government did not make any of these stamps available to anyone, so basically the Supreme Court came out and said, this cannot happen, this is unconstitutional. Marijuana began to gain acceptance in the U.S. during the 1960s with the hippies, civil rights movement, and events such as Woodstock. By the 1990s, there was acceptance in California for medicinal use of marijuana. This was a major stepping stone for the acceptance of the drug entirely. This leads me to my main claim. Marijuana will become legalized in California in November 2010. If you guys do not know, it has been put on the ballot for November 2nd, 2010. If passed, one will have to have a valid ID, be 21 years of age, and will be able to carry up to an ounce of marijuana at a time. It will also be able to be taxed on depending on each city. My supporting claims are, 1, marijuana will create a generous amount of revenue for the state and reduce the amount of money spent on enforcement bans on marijuana. 2nd, there is sufficient demand for marijuana in the state of California. 3rd, legalization of marijuana has received an abundant amount of support. Going back to my first claim that marijuana will create a generous amount of revenue for the state and will reduce the amount of money spent on enforcement bans on marijuana. One of the experts and leading advocates for the legalization of marijuana is NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. They estimate that the legal regulated market for marijuana created the state of California $1.2 billion in tax revenues. The following statistics I'm going to say came from the NORML report. If taxed at $50 per ounce, which is 28.8 grams, it would be $1 per joint, would make anywhere from $770 to $900 million in taxes alone for the state, and it can also make an additional $240 to $360 million in sales tax. The state would also save around $200 million lowering law enforcement costs for things such as inmates in state prisons who have been convicted of marijuana charges. This costs the state and taxpayers an additional $73.5 million a year. The tax costs, jail costs, which are about $29.4 million, felony prosecution, court, probation, and which is about $78.6 million, felony arrest, which is about $12.4 million, and misdemeanor court costs, which is $6.1 million. And finally, the California Marijuana Suppression Program, which comes from the state budget, which is $3.8 million. All this money could be saved with just legalizing marijuana. This would help decrease the deficit in our state and could be put into programs such as our public school institutions. Spin-off industries like paraphernalia, coffee shops, tourism, and the industrial hemp industry will also help generate revenue for the state. If one compares this market to the California wine industry, which brings in $51.8 billion in economic activity from $12.3 billion in retail sales, $10.1 billion in wages for around 309,000 jobs, and $12 billion in tourist expenditures. If legal marijuana market could generate somewhere between 25 to 35% as much retail, one could expect $12 to $18 billion in total economic activity, with 60,000 to 110,000 jobs, and about $2.5 to $3.5 billion in legal wages. Amsterdam-style coffee houses could drive in tourism and create jobs for roughly 50,000 people who would earn about $1.4 million in wages. This will add additional revenue to the state from income tax and also business tax. California has $3.4 billion cotton industry already, and if they're able to produce an industrial hemp, this can only strengthen that one industry. With all that money that could be made and saved through the legalization of marijuana, it warrants the fact that we should and will legalize marijuana to help in our deficit and our unemployment problem. This is comparable to what happened during the Great Depression when the reversed amendment to ban alcohol in order to generate revenue for the country through taxation. My second claim, which is a smaller claim, is that there is sufficient demand for marijuana in the state of California. The demand will push for the legalization of marijuana this November. The United States Department of Health and Human Services SAMHSA 2007 surveyed a large amount of people in California and found about that 1.95 million Californians admitted to using marijuana in just the past month. From the same survey, it was found that 400,000 daily users and about 500,000 to 600,000 said they're regular users, which means they use several times during the last week. My third and final claim is that the legalization of marijuana has received an abundant amount of support for the bill to be passed. In order for this dispute to be put on the ballot, it had to be petitioned and get around 433,000 signatures. The petition received around 700,000 signatures, backing the legalization of marijuana. According to LA Times, 56% of California surveyed by Field Poll said they were in favor of the legalization of marijuana. This might not seem like an overwhelming number, but this was taken before Richard Lee and his supporters were able to generate funds to promote the bill. Richard Lee, an Oxford University president, who is the main one backing this bill, has put $1.3 million of his own money to support the bill. He has recruited billionaires and also millionaires, such as the founder of Men's Warehouse, George Zimmer, and people who have held public offices. Support for this bill has come from a former employee of the White House on the president campaign, Chris Lehan, retired Orange County Superior Court Judge James P. Gray, and organizations such as NAACP, which is California's oldest civil rights group, people like Jeffrey Studhood, who was a former school district police officer and Reserve LA County Sheriff Deputy. Another organization, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, which is a group of police officers who banded together for this, and many more. Dan Rush, a United Food and Commercial Worker International Union, tells ABC News, "I believe it will create tens of thousands of sustainable, single-earned union jobs for the long run." This is what our state and what our country needs right now. In conclusion, because of how much money legalization of marijuana will generate for the state and for how many jobs it will create for the state, because of how much money the legalization of marijuana will generate for the state and for how many jobs it will create from growing, selling, and distributing and spin-off industries, it will pass in November. Our state's deficit and unemployment rate could use this in order to help both of these two. Also, the demand and the support for the bill will help this bill prevail in the upcoming vote. Because of all this, marijuana will become legalized in California in November of this year. Thank you.
All right, you've got a very specific claim of future fact. It's a prediction about what's going to happen in November. The secondary claims, though, the first and second points really don't seem to be connected to that proposition. Now, later on in the argument, I think you do a couple things to try and make them relevant, but at the beginning, I think it's a little problematic. There's one point, for instance, where you suggest that the lifting of prohibition was a desire to create revenue for the government, and that's really one of the things that motivated that particular change. But I got no evidence on that that shows that that's true. That seems to be your assertion. So as an analogy on that point, I think that's a little bit problematic. The promises that are being made about economic advantages of legalization, I think you do a pretty good job trying to explain what all of the claims are there and how the inferences are being made. The confidence level that you have in those conclusions, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that marijuana is exactly analogous to wine country. You go to wine country and you do wine tasting. Maybe there are a whole bunch of pot tours that are going to be going around, up there by Eureka, and they're going to go from farm to farm and test out the kind. That seems to me to be kind of a hallucination. I'm sure it'll happen, but I'm not exactly sure that it's going to draw people from around the world. When we start exporting marijuana to France and they put it on the menu there, the same way they put California Merlots and Pinot Noirs on the menu, then maybe we'll get that kind of thing. But I think there's a little bit of pie in the sky sort of stuff on that. But you did a good job trying to sell it. And the third point, which is the one that really most applies to the argument that you're advancing, I think it needs a little bit more development. The list of all the people that are involved in supporting this,